Episode 1. The Boy Who Looked at the Sky. July 16th, 1969. Cape Kennedy, Florida. A Titanic rocket points toward infinity, while millions hold their breath. Inside that metal capsule, a quiet 38-year-old man is about to make the most impossible journey in human history. His name, Neil Armstrong. But how did he get there? What transformed a boy from the American Midwest into the first human to walk on the moon? This is his story. August 5th, 1930. In a small town called Wapakoneta, in the heart of Ohio, Neil Alden Armstrong is born. His father, Stephen Armstrong, is a state auditor. His mother, Viola, is a homemaker. The family lives modestly, moving constantly due to his father's job. During the first 15 years of Neil's life, the family will move more than 20 times across Ohio. But one thing remains constant: the boy's insatiable hunger to understand how things work. July 20th, 1936. Neil is barely 6 years old when his father takes him to the National Air Races in Cleveland. Their father and son climb into a Ford Trimitar, a passenger plane nicknamed the Tin Goose. The roar of the engines, the vibration of the fuselage, the sensation of taking off from the ground. Everything is etched in little Neil's mind. From that moment on, the sky ceases to be a limit and becomes a destination. The 1930s in the United States were difficult times. The Great Depression still casts its shadow over millions of families. But in the basement of the Armstrong family home, Neil built his own universe. With wood, glue, and an almost obsessive concentration, the boy built model airplanes. Every detail mattered. The wings, the propellers, the rudders. It wasn't just about playing. It was about understanding. Understanding how something heavier than air could defy gravity. His parents watched with curiosity as his meticulous, silent son, who preferred spending hours in his makeshift workshop rather than playing outside. Neil doesn't just look up at the sky during the day. At night, with a telescope he built with the help of his neighbors, he explores the moon, the planets, the constellations, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, distant worlds that seem impossible to reach. Or is it? A question is already forming in his young mind that will stay with him his whole life. What's up there? Astronomy becomes his second passion after aviation. Or perhaps both are the same passion, the need to explore the unknown. At 13, Neil joined the Boy Scouts of America. Although shy and reserved, he stands out for his discipline and quiet leadership. He isn't the loudest speaker, but he's the one everyone listens to when he says something. He learns survival skills, navigation, and teamwork. He achieves the rank of Eagle Scout, the highest honor in the Boy Scouts, something only 2% of Scouts achieve. This early experience of leadership, responsibility, and working under pressure will be fundamental in his future. 1946. Neil is 16 years old and works at the local pharmacy, at the cemetery, anywhere that pays. But his goal is clear: to raise money for flying lessons. $9 an hour, a high price for a teenager in post-war America. But Neil is willing to pay any price to touch the controls of an airplane. Finally, the day arrives. His instructor, Aubrey Nudgard, takes him in an Aero Inca Champion. Neil feels a control stick in his hands, feels how the plane responds to his movements. It's as if he was born to do this. August 14th, 1947. Something extraordinary and almost absurd happens. Neil Armstrong obtains his student pilot's license before obtaining his driver's license. He's 16 years old and can already legally pilot an airplane, but he still can't drive a car alone. For Neil, the choice is obvious. Why limit himself to the roads when you can take to the skies? His schoolmates see him as an odd boy, too serious, too focused. But Neil pays them no attention. He has other horizons in mind. 1947. Neil graduates from Bloom High School in Wapakoneta. It's time to decide his future. He applies to several colleges, but the family's finances remain tight. Then an opportunity arrives: the United States Navy's Holloway Plan scholarship. The deal is clear. The Navy will pay for his education in aeronautical engineering at Purdue University, and in return, Neil must serve as a naval aviator. For Neil, it's not a sacrifice. It's a dream come true to study what he loves and fly for his country. September 1947. Neil arrives at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. The university has one of the best aeronautical engineering schools in the country. Neil immerses himself in math, physics, aerodynamics, and thermodynamics. He isn't the most sociable student, but he is one of the most dedicated. While other students are out partying, Neil is in the library calculating lift coefficients or in the wind tunnel observing how air flows over wings. His analytical mind and ability to solve complex problems begin to shine. January 1949. Neil is 18 years old and barely 2 years at Purdue when the Navy calls. The Korean War has broken out, and the United States needs pilots. Neil must interrupt his studies and report for flight training. Some young people see this as a disruption of their lives. For Neil, it's the opportunity to test his skills in the most demanding environment possible: aerial combat. He says goodbye to his family, packs his things, and heads to the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. His life is about to change forever. August 1950. Neil Armstrong officially becomes a naval aviator, earning his golden wings. He's barely 20 years old and already one of the youngest pilots in the Navy. But the celebration is short-lived. In a few weeks, he will be deployed to the aircraft carrier USS Essex bound for Korea. There, he won't fly out of passion or study. He'll fly to survive, and in the skies above Korea. He will face situations that will test not only his skill as a pilot, but also his ability to remain calm when death lurks every second. The question is, will the young man who dreamed of flying survive to become the man who would walk on the moon? Episode 2, Fire in the Skies of Korea. 1951. The aircraft carrier USS Essex slices through the waters of the Yellow Sea. On the flight deck, dozens of Grumman F-9F Panther jets wait their turn to take off. These fighter jets are powerful machines, but also unforgiving to novice pilots. Neil Armstrong, now an ensign, adjusts his helmet and checks the instruments in his cockpit. He is 21 years old and about to fly his first combat mission. His heart is beating fast, but his face remains impassive. He has trained for this. But no training can truly prepare you for war. August 29, 1951. Neil takes off from the Essex as part of an armed reconnaissance mission over Songjin, North Korea. His objective: to destroy enemy storage facilities. The F-9F Panther flies at 500 kilometers per hour, barely 100 meters above the mountainous terrain. Below, the landscape blurs by. Suddenly, Neil feels a brutal impact. His plane has collided with an anti-aircraft cable strung between two peaks. The cable tears almost 2 meters off the right wing. The plane begins to shake violently. The alarm sound. Neil has seconds to decide: eject over enemy territory or try to reach friendly territory. He chooses the latter. With the plane damaged and rapidly losing altitude, Neil struggles with the controls. The F-9F isn't responding well. It's banking dangerously to the right because of the mangled wing. But Neil doesn't panic. He adjusts the ailerons, trims with the rudder, and keeps the throttle steady. Every muscle in his body is tense, but his mind remains cool and calculating. He manages to cross back into territory controlled by UN forces. He knows he can't land with the damage he's done. At low altitude, over a field near Pohang, he ejects. The catapult seat launches him into the air. The parachute opens. Neil slowly descends as his plane crashes in flames. He has survived his first real brush with death. Back on the Essex, Neil's squadron mates await news. When he arrives safely thanks to a rescue helicopter, some expect to see him shaken and shaking. But Neil simply reports what happened with clinical calm, as if he were describing a training exercise. I hit a cable. The wing was damaged. I ejected. I'm fine. His superiors take note. This young man has something special. He's not reckless, but he doesn't freeze under pressure either. He's exactly the kind of pilot the Navy needs. Over the next few months, Neil flies mission after mission: bombing, reconnaissance, escort, close air support. In total, he will fly 78 combat missions over Korea. Each flight is a calculated risk. Anti-aircraft fire, extreme weather conditions, enemy aircraft mechanical failure. He sees comrades who don't return. He sees planes explode in midair. But every time he climbs into the cockpit, Neil transforms fear into focus. He doesn't think about dying. He thinks about the next step. Takeoff, mission completion, landing, one problem at a time. For his service in Korea, Neil would receive several decorations, including the Air Star, the Korean Campaign Medal, and the National Defense Service Medal. But for Neil, these medals aren't trophies of glory. They're reminders of responsibility. Responsibility to his comrades, to his mission, to his country. The war has taught him something fundamental. In extreme situations, the difference between life and death often comes down to staying calm and executing what was trained. This lesson will stay with him for the rest of his life. 1952. His naval service completed. Neil returns to Purdue University. He's aged years and months. The students around him look like children worried about exams and appointments. Neil has seen death up close, but he doesn't feel superior or traumatized. He simply dives back into his studies with renewed determination. He now understands that aeronautical engineering isn't just abstract theory. It's the difference between a plane that flies and one that kills its pilot. Every calculation, every design, every decision matters. At Purdue, Neil meets Janet Elizabeth Sheeran, a home economics major. Janet is vivacious, sociable, everything Neil is not. But something about Neil's quiet seriousness draws her to him. They begin dating. Janet discovers that behind the reserved facade is a man of dry humor, brilliant intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. For Neil, Janet represents something war and aviation can't give him. Real human connection, warmth home. She balances him. He finds in her a refuge from the technical and dangerous world he inhabits. 1955. Neil graduates from Purdue with a degree in aeronautical engineering. He's 25 years old, and the world offers him multiple paths. Stay in the Navy, work for private jet manufacturers, teach. But Neil chooses something different. He applies to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the agency that will eventually become NASA. His application is accepted. He's assigned to NACA's high-speed flight station in Edwards, California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert. There, the world's most advanced and experimental aircraft are tested. Neil is about to enter the realm of test pilot. Edwards Air Force Base is a legendary place. Here, pilots defy the laws of physics. Here, the sound barrier was broken. Here, rocket planes reach altitudes where the sky turns black and the stars shine at midday. Neil arrives humbled, knowing he's among the world's greatest pilots. Chuck Yeager, the first man to break the sound barrier, works here. So do Scott Crossfield, Pete Knight, Joe Walker. These men are aviators, engineers, and scientists all at the same time. Neil has found his tribe. January 28, 1956. Neil and Janet are married in an intimate ceremony at the Congregational Church in Wilmette, Illinois. Janet accepts that her husband will have a dangerous career. Neil promises to do his best to return home every night. They move to a small home near Edwards. In 1957, their first son, Eric Allen Armstrong, is born. 2 years later, in 1959, Karen and Armstrong, nicknamed Muffy, is born. Neil finds that being a father gives him a new perspective. He now has even stronger reasons to fly with precision and caution. 1956. In a secret hangar at Edwards, Neil watches a machine that looks like something out of science fiction, the X-15. This rocket plane is like nothing that has ever flown before. It can reach 6 times the speed of sound. It can climb to the edge of space. Its pilots aren't merely aviators. They're almost astronauts. Neil knows he'll eventually get the chance to fly this beast, and that chance will take him closer to space than any human before him. But before he gets there, he'll have to test dozens of other experimental planes, each one more dangerous than the last. The question isn't whether Neil will have crashes. The question is whether he'll survive them. Episode 3, At the Edge of Space, 1956 to 1960. These are Neil Armstrong's golden years as a test pilot at Edwards. His job is simple in theory. Fly experimental aircraft, push them to the limits, collect data, survive, report back. In practice, it's one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. Neil flies more than 200 different models of aircraft: fighters, bombers, helicopters, gliders, rocket planes. Each machine has its quirks, its dangers. Some are bordering on uncontrollable. But Neil develops a reputation. If Armstrong says a plane is safe, it is. If he says there's a problem, you'd better listen. One of the planes Neil flies regularly is the F-104 Starfighter, nicknamed the Widowmaker for its accident rate. It's a supersonic fighter interceptor with tiny wings and a monstrous engine. It flies like a missile, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Neil masters it with patience and respect. He learns that every plane has a personality. You must understand it, adapt to it, not fight it. This philosophy will keep him alive when other, less patient pilots die trying to impose their will on machines that won't negotiate. Finally, the day arrives. Neil is selected to fly the X-15. This is no conventional airplane. It is launched from AB-52 bomber in mid-flight. Its rocket engines burn fuel at a terrifying rate. It reaches speeds where air friction heats the structure to hundreds of degrees, and it climbs so high that the sky disappears and the black of space replaces it. November 15, 1960. Neil makes his first flight in the X-15. He reaches an altitude of 18,288 meters. It is the highest flight he has ever made. From the cockpit, he can see the curvature of the Earth. Stars shine brightly above the dark blue horizon. For a few minutes, Neil Armstrong is at the edge of space. 1961. Neil's life suffers a devastating blow. His daughter Karen, barely 2.5 years old, is diagnosed with a brain tumor. Doctors do their best, but in January 1962, Karen dies. Neil and Janet are devastated. For Neil, who has always relied on calculations, numbers, and control, this is a loss he can't solve with equations. There is no emergency protocol for the grief of losing a child. Colleagues notice that Neil becomes even more silent, more focused on work. Flying is his refuge. In the sky, the rules are clear. In life, they are not. April 20th, 1962. Neil flies another mission in the X-15. The plan is to reach 79,240 meters and test new control systems. The climb is perfect, but as the descent begins, something goes wrong. The plane bounces in the atmosphere like a stone skipping through water. Neil tries to correct it, but the X-15 refuses to descend. It passes completely over Edwards and plunges into the desert. He finally manages to control the craft and turn around, but has only seconds of fuel left. He manages to land on the runway by the narrowest possible margin. Simulations will later show that if he tried to return just 3 seconds later, he would have run out of power and crashed. 3 seconds between life and death. As Neil flies over the California desert, the world watches an era-defining competition: the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. The United States is right behind him. President John F. Kennedy responds with a bold challenge. Before the decade is out, the United States will land a man on the moon and return him safely. The goal seems impossible, but to achieve it, NASA will need the best pilots, engineers, and minds in the country. It will need people like Neil Armstrong. 1962. NACA has morphed into NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The agency is recruiting for a new group of astronauts, the second group nicknamed the New Nine. Pilots with jet experience, an engineering background, and the ability to remain calm in extreme situations are needed. Neil Armstrong fits the bill. But there's a hitch. His application arrives a week late. Luckily, a friend at NASA, Dick Day, discreetly slips Neil's application into the pile just in time. Sometimes fate needs a little nudge. September 1962. NASA announces the 9 new astronauts. Among them, Neil Armstrong. Also in the group are Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Tom Stafford, and others who will eventually fly historic missions. Neil is 32 years old. He has gone from dreaming of flying to flying the world's fastest planes. Now, he's about to go even further, into outer space. But being selected is only the first step. The training will be brutal, and the risk unimaginable. The transformation from test pilot to astronaut requires new skills. Neil must learn geology to collect lunar samples. He must train in centrifuges that simulate extreme G-forces. He must practice underwater spacewalks. He must study the stars for celestial navigation. He must learn to work as a team in ways he never had to in a solo cockpit. And he must mentally prepare for the very real possibility of dying a fireball during launch, in the vacuum of space, or upon atmospheric re-entry. Neil absorbs it all with his signature approach. Methodical, exhaustive, relentless. NASA has a phase plan for reaching the moon. First came Mercury, putting a man into orbit. Now comes Gemini, learning to live and work in space, mastering ship docking and performing spacewalks. Finally comes Apollo, the journey to the moon. Neil will be part of the Gemini program. He's assigned as backup pilot for Gemini 5, meaning that if anything happens to Prime Crew, he'd fly. But being backup also means something else. The near certainty of flying on a subsequent mission. Neil waits his turn. 1965. Neil receives news. He will be the command pilot of Gemini 8. His crewmate will be Dave Scott. The mission has ambitious goals: to perform the first docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit, and for Scott to conduct a 2-hour spacewalk. This docking is critical for future Apollo lunar missions. If they can't dock ships in orbit, there's no way for the lunar module to rendezvous with the command ship around the moon. Everything depends on mastering this technique. And Neil Armstrong will be the first to try. March 16, 1966. Cape Kennedy. The Titan II rocket with the Gemini 8 capsule at its tip awaits launch. Neil and Dave are locked in the capsule's cramped space. They've trained for months. They know every procedure, every contingency. Or so they think, because in just a few hours, something will go catastrophically wrong. The mission will become a desperate fight for survival. And Neil Armstrong will have to make split-second decisions that will determine whether he and Dave return home or die spinning out of control in the vacuum of space. The countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. Episode 4. Spinning Towards Death. March 16, 1966. 10:41 a.m. Eastern Time. Titan II's engines roar to life. Neil and Dave feel the brutal vibration as the rocket lifts off the pad. 2GS, 3GS, 4GS. The pressure in their chests increases. Earth is rapidly receding. 11 minutes later, they're in orbit at 305 kilometers. Everything has gone perfectly. Mission Control confirms. Gemini 8, you're in orbit. Everything looks good from here. Neil responds with his characteristic calm. Roger that, Houston. All nominal. But in space, things can go beyond nominal in an instant. Hours before Gemini 8's launch, NASA launched an Agena target vehicle into orbit. This is an unmanned rocket designed for Gemini 8 to practice docking. Neil must maneuver his capsule, align it with the Agena, and connect smoothly. It sounds simple, but they're traveling at over 27,000 kilometers per hour. One miscalculation and they could collide, destroying both craft. Neil uses the Gemini's thrusters with precise taps. Bit by bit, the distance closes. 500 meters. 100 meters. 50. The Agena fills their viewport. We're going to dock, Neil reports to Houston. 6 hours and 33 minutes after launch, Neil Armstrong makes history. Gemini 8's docking collar connects with the Agena with a metallic clunk. The hooks click shut. They're docked. It's the first time in history that 2 spacecraft have joined in orbit. Mission Control erupts in applause. Neil allows a brief smile. Houston, we've docked. All stable. It's a moment of triumph. Dave Scott prepares for his spacewalk. The mission is going perfectly. But that perfection is about to turn into a nightmare. 30 minutes after docking, Neil feels something strange. The combined Gemini-Agena ship begins to spin. Slowly at first, then faster. Dave, do you feel that? Neil checks the gauges. The problem seems to be coming from the Agena. Perhaps a thruster is firing unintentionally. Neil uses Gemini's thrusters to counteract the spin. It works for a moment, but the spin returns, more violent now. Earth, The stars, the blackness of space begin to spin past the windows in a nauseating carousel. Neil reports to Houston. We've got serious trouble here. We're in a spin we can't stop. Houston analyzes the incoming data. The problem seems to be with the Agena. Gemini 8, attempt to undock from the Agena. I repeat, undock. Neil activates the separation sequence. The hooks release. Gemini 8 moves away from the Agena. For a moment, it seems the problem is solved. But then something terrifying happens. The spin accelerates dramatically. It wasn't the Agena. It's the Gemini. One of its thrusters is firing uncontrollably. The capsule begins spinning at 1 revolution per second. Neil and Dave are being violently shaken. Their vision blurs. The world is in a whirlpool. The rotation increases. 1 revolution per second becomes almost 2. At this rate, the G-forces could cause Neil and Dave to lose consciousness in minutes. If they are knocked unconscious, the ship will continue to spin until the fuel runs out or the structure breaks apart. Mission Control is receiving chaotic data. They can't talk to the crew most of the time because they're out of range of the tracking stations. Neil tries shutting down different thruster systems. Nothing works. The culprit is the Orbital Control System's number 8 thruster. It's stuck open, firing constantly, spinning the ship like a top. Neil Armstrong faces an unprecedented situation. No astronaut has been in this position before. Emergency procedures don't cover this specific scenario. He has to improvise, and he has less than a minute to decide before the G-forces incapacitate him. Then Neil remembers something. The Gemini capsule has 2 independent propulsion systems. The Orbital Control System, OCS, for maneuvers in orbit, and the Reentry Control System, RCS, for the return to Earth. Regulations state that the RCS should only be activated for descent. But Neil has no choice. With steady hands despite the violent spin, Neil completely deactivates the Orbital Control System. Then, he activates the Reentry Control System. He uses the RCS thrusters to counteract the spin. Little by little, revolutionarily slowly, the rotation slows. 1 revolution per second. 3/4. Half. 1/4. Finally, after minutes that seem like hours, Gemini 8 stabilizes. Neil and Dave breathe deeply. They are covered in sweat. They are alive. Neil reports to Houston when they reestablish contact. We've controlled the spin using the RCS. But there's a problem. NASA's rules are clear. Once the RCS is activated, the mission must be aborted immediately and returned to Earth. The RCS uses more than 25% of its fuel to stop the spin. There isn't enough safety margin to continue in orbit. Dave Scott won't perform a spacewalk. The other mission objectives are canceled. After just 10 hours and 41 minutes in space, Gemini 8 will receive the return order. Neil is disappointed, but understands. The priority is to bring the crew home alive. Re-entry is control hell. The capsule hits the atmosphere at thousands of kilometers per hour. Friction creates a plasma shield surrounding the craft. External temperatures reach thousands of degrees. Inside, Neil and Dave are pinned in their seats, feeling 4 GS of deceleration. There's no margin for error. If the angle of re-entry is too steep, they'll burn up. If it's too flat, they'll bounce through the atmosphere into space. But Neil's calculations are accurate. The parachutes deploy. Gemini 8 splashes down in the Pacific Ocean, 800 kilometers east of Okinawa. 3 hours later, they are rescued by the USS Leonard F. Mason. They are safe. NASA launches a thorough investigation. What caused the booster to jam? The conclusion, an electrical short. A tiny fault in the wiring caused the booster to fire continuously. It could have happened to anyone, but not everyone would have survived. Neil's decision to use RCS, even though it violated standard protocol, saved the mission and their lives. Some critics at NASA question whether Neil made the right decision, but most acknowledge the truth. Neil Armstrong had just demonstrated exactly why he was chosen as an astronaut. He thinks clearly under pressure. He doesn't panic. He does whatever it takes to survive. NASA continues to forge ahead. Gemini 9, 10, 11, and 12 fly successfully in the following months. Docking, spacewalks, and extended life in orbit are mastered. The Gemini program meets its goals. But the Apollo program, the effort to reach the moon, faces enormous challenges. The Saturn V rocket is the most powerful machine ever built. The lunar module is an entirely new spacecraft that must land on and take off from another world. And while engineers work day and night, a terrible pressure bears down on everyone. The Soviet Union is also trying to reach the moon. It's a race. And on January 27, 1967, that race will exact a terrible price. A price that will make the entire nation stop and ask, is it worth it? Is it worth risking lives to touch another world? Episode 5, Through Tragedy to the Stars. January 27, 1967. Cape Kennedy, Florida. On Launch Pad 34, 3 astronauts are sealed inside the Apollo 1 capsule. Gus Grissom, Mercury and Gemini veteran, Ed White, the first American to walk in space, and Roger Chaffee, a rookie but brilliant. It's a simple ground rehearsal. There isn't even fuel in the rocket. They're just testing the systems, practicing the procedures. A routine test. Boring, even, but at 6:31 in the evening, a spark jumps in the faulty wiring. In the capsule's pure oxygen atmosphere, that spark instantly turns into an inferno. The fire consumes the cabin in seconds. The astronauts desperately struggle to open a hatch, but it is designed to open inward, and the pressure of the fire keeps it sealed. Screams pierce the radios. Fire in the cabin! The flames are so intense that technicians outside cannot approach. 14 seconds after the fire starts, communications are cut off. Grissom, White, and Chaffee die from asphyxiation in the toxic smoke. By the time emergency crews manage to open the hatch, it is too late. The nation is in shock. The space program, which seemed invincible, has just lost 3 of its best. Neil Armstrong knew these men well. Gus Grissom was a close friend. Ed White had been a training partner. The news of their deaths hits him hard. But Neil processes the grief the way he always does, by burying himself in work. He participates in the accident investigation. He reviews designs. He analyzes flaws. The conclusion is clear. There was negligence. Too much haste to fulfill President Kennedy's promise. Poorly insulated wiring. Flammable materials in the cockpit. A hatch that couldn't be opened quickly. Mistakes that cost 3 lives. NASA must learn from this. It must be better, or more astronauts will die. The Apollo program comes to a complete halt for 20 months. Every component of the craft is redesigned. The pure oxygen atmosphere is replaced with a nitrogen-oxygen mixture during launch. Flammable materials are removed from the cabin. The hatch is redesigned to open in seconds. Thousands of miles of wiring are overhauled. Safety procedures are rewritten. It's a massive effort involving thousands of engineers. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union continues its own lunar program. Every month that passes without American flights is a month the Soviets gain ground. During the break, Neil continues training. One of the most important devices is the Lunar Training Vehicle, LLTV, nicknamed the Flying Bed. It's a strange platform that simulates the flight of the lunar module on the final leg of landing. It has a jet engine that supports 5/6 of its weight, simulating the reduced lunar gravity. It's notoriously difficult to fly, unstable, unpredictable. Several pilots refuse to fly in it. But Neil understands that if he's going to land on the moon, he needs to practice in realistic conditions. He flies the LLTV dozens of times. May 6, 1968. Neil is piloting the LLTV at Ellington Air Force Base near Houston. The flight is going well until, at 100 meters altitude, the vehicle loses attitude control. It begins to bank dangerously. Neil tries to correct, but the thrusters don't respond. In less than 2 seconds, the LLTV banks past the recovery point. Neil has a split second to decide. He activates the ejection seat. The explosive charge throws him into the air. The parachute opens. Neil lands hard but unharmed. The LLTV crashes and explodes in a ball of fire. Neil bites his tongue during ejection. It's his only injury. He walks back to his office and continues working. His colleagues are amazed at his calm. October 11, 1968. Apollo 7 takes off with Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham. It is the first crewed Apollo flight since the fire. The mission lasts 11 days. All systems are exhaustively tested. Despite tensions between the crew and mission control, the mission is a technical success. The Apollo capsule is operational. The United States is back in the game. But the Soviet Union is launching its own series of missions. The race is far from over. December 24th, 1968. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders orbit the moon aboard Apollo 8. They are the first humans to see the far side of the moon, the first to see the entire Earth dangling in the vacuum of space. From lunar orbit, they broadcast a reading from Genesis on Christmas Eve. Nearly 1 billion people listen. It is one of the most poignant moments of the space age. The mission proves that the Saturn V rocket and the Apollo spacecraft can travel to the moon and back. Now there's only one more step. Landing. January 1969. Deke Slayton, director of the astronaut office, calls Neil into his office. Neil, I'm assigning you as commander of Apollo 11. If Apollo 9 and 10 go well, 11 will be the lunar landing attempt. Neil keeps his face impassive, but inside he feels a surge of emotion he rarely experiences. This is the mission. This is why everything has led up to this. It will be his job, his responsibility, to take 2 men to the surface of the moon and back. The full crew will be Neil Armstrong as commander, Buzz Aldrin as lunar module pilot, and Michael Collins as command module pilot. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins are very different personalities. Neil is quiet, reserved, intensely focused. Buzz is brilliant, ambitious, sometimes abrasive, with a Ph.D. from MIT and Orbital Rendezvous. Michael Collins is charismatic, laid-back, the kind of person who makes teamwork look easy. The 3 respect each other. They understand that their lives will depend on each other. They begin training together immediately. Simulations in the modules, geology studies, contingency planning. Every imaginable scenario is practiced over and over again. Apollo 9 flies in March 1969. Jim McDivitt, Dave Scott, and Rusty Schweikart test a lunar module in Earth orbit. It works perfectly. Apollo 10 flies in May. Tom Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan take the lunar module up to 15,000 meters above the lunar surface. A complete dress rehearsal except for the actual landing. Everything is ready. There are no more excuses, no more delays, no more rehearsals. Apollo 11 will be the real attempt. If anything goes wrong, Neil, Buzz, and Mike could be the next names on the list of fallen astronauts. But if all goes well, they will be part of the greatest story ever told. Late May 1969. 60 days until launch. Neil stands in his backyard in El Lago, Texas, looking at the moon in the night sky. His 12-year-old son, Rick, is beside him. Dad, are you really going to go there? The boy asks. Neil nods. I'm going to try. Rick asks if he's afraid. Neil thinks for a moment before answering. Not in the way you think. But yes, there is fear. Fear of failing. Fear of letting everyone down. Fear of never making it back. He pauses. But there's also something greater than fear. There's a need to know what's up there, to touch the unattainable. Father and son watch the moon in silence. In 60 days, that silvered in the sky will cease to be an impossible dream. It will become an actual destination, and Neil Armstrong will be the first to reach it. Episode 6. Eagle has landed. July 16, 1969. 4:15 a.m. Neil Armstrong wakes up in the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. He slept barely 5 hours, but he feels alert. Today is the day. He showers, shaves, looks in the mirror. The same face as always, but today that face is about to be seen by 1 billion people. He has breakfast with Buzz and Mike. Steak, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. A traditional breakfast for astronauts. They talk little. Each is lost in their own thoughts. Technicians help Neil put on his spacesuit. It's a laborious process that takes more than an hour. First, the cooling underwear with tubes that circulate water. Then the multi-layered pressure suit. The gloves, the helmet, the life support systems are meticulously checked. Everything must be perfect. A faulty seal, a stuck valve. Any failure could be fatal. Finally, dressed like a visitor from another world, Neil trudges toward the van that will take him to the launch pad. Cameras capture him. The world is watching. The Saturn V rocket is a majestic beast, 111 meters tall, 6 million kilograms in weight, the most powerful object ever built by humans. It generates a force equivalent to a small nuclear bomb, but is controlled, targeted, and focused on a single purpose: escaping Earth's gravity. Neil, Buzz, and Mike are lifted in an elevator to the Apollo capsule at the top, 300 meters above the ground. The ocean wind gently moves the rocket. From here, they can see the Atlantic stretching to the horizon. They enter the capsule and are sealed inside. 9:32 in the morning, Eastern Time, T-minus 15 minutes. Neil lies on his back in the left commander's seat, looking at controls and switches. He mentally reviews the abort procedures. If something goes wrong in the first few seconds, they must separate from the exploding rocket. He has barely 3 seconds to decide. T-minus 5 minutes. The tanks pressurize. Power is transferred to internal. T-minus 1 minute. The wind calms. 1 million people surround the Space Center. Around the world, families gather around televisions. T-minus 10 seconds. Saturn V's engines fire. 9, 8, 7, 0. The retaining clamps release. Saturn V rises slowly, almost with dignity, on a column of fire that would make the sun seem insignificant. Inside the capsule, Neil feels the brutal vibration. It's not like any other launch. It's smoother, more powerful, inevitable. The clock is ticking. Neil reports to Mission Control. His voice is calm, professional. There's no detectable emotion. But as the rocket accelerates skyward, piercing clouds, leaving the atmosphere behind, entering the black of space, Neil knows there's no turning back. They're committed. 12 minutes after liftoff, they're in Earth orbit. The first step is complete. After 1.5 orbits around the Earth, checking systems, the critical moment arrives. The translunar ignition, the third engine. The stadium lights up for the second time, pushing Apollo 11 out of Earth's orbit onto a trajectory that will take them to the moon. There's no dramatic sense of acceleration, but the numbers on the instruments confirm. They're leaving Earth behind. Neil looks out the window. Earth is now a complete disk, blue and white, floating in the darkness. He's never seen it like this. It's beautiful, fragile, unique. The trip to the moon takes 3 days. 72 hours of checking systems, making minor course corrections, eating, sleeping in shifts, and looking out windows. The moon gradually grows from a bright to a disk to a world. Mike Collins navigates using a sextant, measuring angles between stars. Buzz reviews checklists. Neil mentally practices a landing. They speak little. Tensions mount. They are farther and farther from home. If anything goes wrong now, there is no rescue possible. They must solve any problems themselves or die trying. July 19th, Apollo 11 disappears behind the moon, losing radio contact with Earth. In that moment of absolute solitude, isolated from all human activity, they fire the service module's engine to slow down and enter lunar orbit. If the engine fails, they will pass by the moon and be lost in space. But the engine works perfectly. When they emerge on the far side of the moon and re-establish communication, Neil reports with barely contained satisfaction. Houston, we're in lunar orbit. They orbit 100 kilometers above the gray, cratered surface. They identify landmarks. They search for the planned landing site in the Sea of Tranquility. July 20th, 1969. The day has arrived. Neil and Buzz transfer from the command module Columbia to the lunar module Eagle. Mike Collins stays behind. His job is to keep Columbia in orbit, ready to pick them up when they return. The two modules separate. Mike watches as the Eagle, that strange golden metallic spider, flies away. The Eagle has wings, Neil reports. They are alone now, on the most fragile ship ever built, about to attempt something that's never been done, descending to the surface of another world. The descent begins on the far side of the moon. The Eagle's engine fires, slowing the craft from orbit. When they emerge where Houston can hear them, They're already engaged. We're going for power descent. Neil confirms. The Eagle descends backward, feet first, braking constantly. Neil and Buzz stand, held in harnesses, looking at instruments and through small windows. At 15,000 meters, the Eagle turns around, pointing down. For the first time, they clearly see where they're going. At 6,000 meters, something unexpected happens. An alarm sounds in the cockpit. Program alarm. 1202, Buzz reports, his voice strained. The Eagle's computer is overloaded, receiving more data than it can process. It could crash at any moment. Neil looks at Buzz. Abort? Return to orbit? In mission control, engineers analyze frantically. 26-year-old Steve Bales, the guidance officer, makes a decision. Proceed with 1202. It's safe to continue. Neil trusts his judgment. They continue descending, but his heart is beating faster now. 1,500 meters. Neil looks out the window, and his heart sinks. The computer is taking them directly toward a crater the size of a football field, surrounded by boulders the size of cars. They can't land there. They'd crash, but they have only seconds to decide, and fuel is running out fast. Neil takes manual control of the Eagle. His hands move over the controls with precision born of 1,000 hours of training. He circles the crater, looking for level ground. 500 meters. 300. The fuel gauge is dropping rapidly. Mission control warns 60 seconds of fuel. If they don't land in 60 seconds, they'll have to abort or fall uncontrolled. Neil searches desperately. 200 meters. 150. 30 seconds, Houston warns. Will he make it? Or will they die 30 seconds away from making history? Episode 7, One Small Step. The Eagle hovers 50 meters above the lunar surface, moving sideways as Neil searches for a safe place to land. Lunar dust begins to kick up from the engine exhaust, obscuring the view. The fuel gauge is almost at zero. 10 seconds, Houston announces. It's now or never. Neil sees a relatively flat area. He descends smoothly. 30 meters. 20. 10. 5. A blue light illuminates on the panel. Surface contact. Neil immediately cuts the engine. For an instant, the Eagle silently drops the last few inches. The feet touch the lunar dust. A slight bounce. They settle. Silence. Immobility. July 20th, 1969. 3:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. From the cockpit of the Eagle, Neil Armstrong speaks words that will echo through the centuries. Houston, this is Tranquility Base. The Eagle has landed. His voice is calm, almost casual, as if he's just parked a car. At mission control in Houston, there's a split second of stunned silence. Then it explodes in celebration. Captain Charlie Duke replies, his voice shaken with emotion. Roger that. Tranquility. We got a bunch of guys about to turn blue in here. Now we're breathing again. Thank you very much. Neil allows a small smile. You did it. They're on the moon. There's no time for prolonged celebrations. Neil and Buzz immediately begin post-landing checks. Is the Eagle intact? Are there leaks? Are the systems working? For the next 30 minutes, they methodically check each system. Everything seems fine. The ascent engine, which they'll need to blast off on the moon and return to Columbia, is working. The oxygen tanks are full. The batteries have a charge. They're safe, at least for now. Houston gives them permission to stay. The scheduled moonwalk is in several hours, but Neil has a different idea. The original plan was for Neil and Buzz to sleep before going to surface. After all, they've been awake for almost 20 hours. But Neil argues they're wide awake from the adrenaline. The systems are working fine. Why wait? If something goes wrong during the lunar night, they could lose the opportunity entirely. Houston considers. It's irregular, but Neil is the commander. If he thinks they can do it now, they trust his judgment. Relax. Go ahead for early EVA prep. Neil and Buzz look at each other. It's time to go. Putting on the portable life support suits in the Eagle's tiny cockpit is like trying to dress inside a closet while wearing boxing gloves. Neil and Buzz help each other. They check the oxygen systems, the radios, the cameras. They go through checklists. Every step must be done perfectly. One mistake could be fatal. Finally, they depressurize the cabin. The artificial atmosphere escapes into the vacuum. They open the hatch. Neil kneels, then climbs backward to the narrow opening. He emerges onto the small platform at the top of the Eagle's ladder. Neil slowly descends the 9 steps of the ladder. Each movement is deliberate, careful. The suit is bulky and rigid. The lunar gravity, 1/6 that of Earth's, makes everything feel strange. From Houston and around the world, 600 million people watch on black and white television as a white figure descends the ladder. Neil reaches the bottom step. His boots are inches from the lunar soil. He pauses for a moment. This is the moment. He takes a deep breath. Then he lowers his left foot. The sole touches a fine, gray lunar dust. July 21st, 1969, 2:56 a.m. Eastern Time. Neil Armstrong utters the words he's been considering for weeks. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. His voice crackles across 240,000 kilometers of empty space. On Earth, people are weeping. They hug. They clap. In this moment, divisions of race, politics, nationality seem insignificant. A human being is walking on another world. And in that act, he represents the entire species. Neil takes a few tentative steps. Moon dust compacts beneath his boots, leaving sharp footprints. The surface is fine and powdery, he reports. I can kick it up at the toe of my boot. 19 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin descends the ladder. Neil photographs him emerging from the Eagle. Buzz surveys the lunar landscape and utters his own memorable description. Magnificent desolation. And that's exactly what it is. A landscape of endless grays, pitch-black shadows, a horizon too close because of the curvature of the tiny moon. No air, no life, no sound except their own breathing and the voices over radio. But magnificently, supernaturally beautiful in its strangeness. The 2 men begin their work. Neil and Buzz have a list of tasks to complete in 2 hours and 31 minutes. First, they plant the American flag. It's a symbolic moment, but also a complicated one. The lunar soil is harder than expected, and they can only get the flagpole in a few inches. They leave it tilted, slightly. Then, Neil collects contingency samples, moon rocks that he quickly packs in case they need to leave in an emergency. They deploy science experiments, a laser reflector to measure the distance between Earth and the moon, and a seismometer to detect moonquakes. They collect more rock and soil samples. They take photographs. Every action is slow, deliberate. President Richard Nixon calls from the White House. His voice carries across 250,000 miles. Neil and Buzz, I'm speaking to you on the telephone from the Oval Office of the White House, and this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. Nixon speaks about the nation's pride, about how this moment unites the world. Neil responds with characteristic modesty, thanking all those who made the moment possible. It's a brief exchange, but it captures the magnitude of the achievement. A president speaking to men in another world, something previous generations would have considered pure fantasy. Neil ventures farther from the Eagle than originally planned. He hikes toward a nearby crater to photograph it and collects samples from its rim. Buzz experiments with different ways of getting around, bunny hopping, skipping, walking. They discover the most efficient method is a slow trot. The dust they kick up doesn't float in the air like it does on Earth. It immediately falls in perfect parabolic arcs because there's no atmosphere to slow it down. Neil observes how the sun creates shadows so black that when he stands in one, he can't see his own feet. Direct sunlight, with no atmosphere to filter it, is blindingly bright. After 2 hours and 31 minutes on the surface, Houston signals it's time to turn back. Neil and Buzz have collected 22 kilograms of lunar rocks and dust. They've completed all their primary objectives and some secondary ones. Reluctantly, they return to the Eagle. They climb the ladder with difficulty, carrying the heavy sample crates. Once inside, they seal the hatch. They pressurize the cabin. They take off their helmets. They smell the lunar dust that has seeped into the cabin. It has a distinctive aroma, like wet gunpowder or wet ash. They're exhausted but elated. They did it. They walked on the moon. Neil and Buzz try to sleep in the Eagle, but it's nearly impossible. The cockpit is cold and uncomfortable. The Eagle's engine, off but still warm, makes expanding and contracting noises that sound eerily like something breaking apart. The radios crackle. Outside, the lunar temperature has dropped to minus 170 degrees Celsius. Inside, with the heating systems running, they are tolerably comfortable but unable to truly rest. Neil sleeps for maybe 30 minutes in total. Both are fully aware that the most dangerous part is yet to come, taking off from the moon. July 21st, 1:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Neil and Buzz have been on the lunar surface for 21 hours and 36 minutes. It's time to go. The problem: no one has ever taken off from the moon. The Eagle's ascent engine hasn't been tested under real-world conditions. It was tested on Earth, but the moon is different. Also, when they landed, the Eagle settled into a slightly tilted position. If the engine pushes them at the wrong angle, they could tip over or enter an uncontrolled spin. And there's no plan B. There's no rescue team. If the engine fails, Neil and Buzz will die on the moon, and the world will watch helplessly. Neil places his hand over the power button. He looks at Buzz. Buzz nods. Neil presses the button. For a split second that seems like an eternity, nothing happens. Then, Episode 8, Return Home. The Eagle's engine roars to life. The small craft shakes violently. Through the windows, Neil and Buzz watch the lunar landscape rapidly fall away. The descent stage, with its golden legs, is left behind in the Sea of Tranquility, where it will remain for millennia. The acceleration is brutal in the small space, but the engine works perfectly. 7 minutes and 22 seconds after ignition, they are in stable lunar orbit. Neil exhales. "That was beautiful," he says with barely contained relief. In mission control, the engineers applaud and hug. The riskiest part is complete, but they still have to find Mike Collins on Columbia. During the 21 hours Neil and Buzz were on the surface, Mike Collins orbited Columbia alone. Every time he passed over the far side of the moon, he lost radio contact with every human in the universe. He was more isolated than any human in history. If something went wrong with the Eagle, Mike would have to return to Earth alone, leaving his companions to die on the moon. He's rehearsed this mentally. He knows exactly what he would say in the subsequent press conferences. But now, hearing that the Eagle is back in orbit, the tension is released. His friends are alive. Now they just have to find each other. The Eagle and Columbia are in different orbits around the moon. For the next few hours, Neil carefully pilots the Eagle, adjusting speed and trajectory, gradually getting closer to Columbia. It's a precise orbital ballet at thousands of kilometers per hour. One miscalculated maneuver, and they could collide or miss each other. But Neil has practiced this hundreds of times in simulators. His hands move confidently over controls. Finally, the two ships are a few feet apart. Mike can see Neil and Buzz's faces through the windows. He smiles broadly. He extends the docking arm. Clunk. They're connected. Mike opens a hatch between Columbia and the Eagle. Neil and Buzz float through. The three astronauts embrace briefly, unusual for such reserved men, but the moment is worth it. "It was great, folks. Just great," says Mike. They transfer the crates of lunar samples to Columbia. The rocks and dust they collected are now the most valuable physical objects on the planet. They hold secrets about the origin of the moon, the early history of the solar system, answers to questions scientists have asked for centuries. Then they seal the Eagle's hatch for the last time. With Neil and Buzz safely on Columbia, they no longer need the lunar module. In fact, its extra weight they don't want to carry home. They separate from the Eagle and leave it in lunar orbit. Eventually, that orbit will decay, and the Eagle will crash land somewhere on the lunar surface. But for now, it floats silently, an empty capsule that carried the first humans to another world. Mike, Neil, and Buzz watch it drift away through the windows. "It was a good ship," Neil says quietly. "It's the most sentimental. They'll see him during the entire mission." July 22nd. It's time to return home. On the far side of the moon, where no one on Earth can see or talk to them, They fire the service module's engine. It's a moment of maximum tension. If the engine fails, they will be trapped in lunar orbit, slowly dying as oxygen runs out. But the engine fires perfectly. For 2 minutes and 30 seconds, it pushes Columbia out of lunar orbit toward a trajectory back to Earth. When they emerge on the far side and re-establish communication, Neil reports with satisfaction, "Houston, we're headed home. 3 more days in space. 60 hours of systems checks, minor course corrections, freeze-dried meals, quiet conversations. The Earth gradually grows from a small disk to a dominant globe that fills the windows. The 3 astronauts are more relaxed now, allowing themselves to joke occasionally, share observations. But there's also a growing tension. Re-entry is approaching. They've done the impossible, but it will all be for nothing if they die in the final minutes upon re-entering Earth's atmosphere. Re-entry is violent, unpredictable. They've seen the charred remains of capsules that return at incorrect angles. July 24th, just hours before re-entry, they separate from the service module, the section containing the engines, fuel tanks, and life support systems that have kept them alive for 8 days. They no longer need it, and it will be dangerous to carry it through the atmosphere. They depart in the command module alone, the small, conical capsule that is the only part designed to survive the hellish heat of re-entry. It's smaller than a compact car. The 3 men are packed inside like canned sardines, and in this tiny can, they will fall toward Earth at 11 kilometers per second. The capsule hits the top of Earth's atmosphere. Immediately, friction begins to slow them down, but that friction generates incredible heat. The temperature on the heat shield reaches 3,000 degrees Celsius. Through the windows, Neil, Buzz, and Mike see an inferno of orange and pink plasma surrounding them. The capsule shakes violently. The G-forces increase. 2G, 3, 4. It's difficult to breathe. They experience up to 6G of deceleration. For 4 minutes, they are in a comms blackout. The plasma surrounding them blocks all radio signals. During those 4 minutes, the world holds its breath. Will they survive? The signal returns. This is Columbia, reading loud and clear. At mission control, they applaud. The pilot chutes deploy, then the main shoots, 3 enormous orange and white canopies. The capsule, which was falling at hundreds of kilometers per hour, slows dramatically. It oscillates gently under the chutes, descending toward the Pacific Ocean. Through the windows, they can see clouds, then blue water stretching to the horizon. After 8 days in space, Earth's blue sky seems impossibly bright and beautiful. "It's good to be back," Mike says, his voice filled with excitement. 12:50 p.m. Eastern Time. Columbia hits the Pacific Ocean, 1,500 kilometers southwest of Hawaii. The impact is hard but bearable. The capsule immediately flips over, landing upside down in the water. Neil, Buzz, and Mike hang from their harnesses, looking up at the now partially flooded ceiling. But the emergency floats quickly inflate, flipping the capsule over. They're left floating upright, bobbing in the waves. Outside, they can hear the sound of approaching helicopters. The aircraft carrier USS Hornet is a few kilometers away. They made it. They've traveled to the moon and back safely. Navy divers open a hatch. They throw on biological isolation suits. As a precaution against possible lunar microbes, NASA requires astronauts to spend 21 days in quarantine. Neil, Buzz, and Mike put on the suits, then are transported by helicopter to the Hornet. They walk the deck and are greeted by President Nixon. Through the isolation suit's visor, Neil watches hundreds of sailors cheering. Flags waving, cameras flashing. It's surreal. 8 days ago, they were on the moon. Now they're back in the celebratory chaos of humanity. They're taken to the mobile lunar receiving facility, basically a sealed trailer where they'll spend the next 3 weeks. While Neil, Buzz, and Mike are quarantined, the world celebrates. In the streets of cities across the planet, millions of people organize spontaneous parades. Newspapers run full-page headlines. Men walk on the moon. World leaders send congratulations. The Secretary General of the United Nations declares it an achievement for all humanity. Even countries traditionally critical of the United States recognize the magnitude of the moment. For a brief moment in human history, something has united the species. The knowledge that we have touched another world. The boundaries of the possible have expanded forever. But Neil Armstrong resists the word hero. When he finally emerges from quarantine and faces the media, he repeatedly insists that the credit belongs to the 400,000 engineers, technicians, scientists, programmers, managers, and workers who made Apollo possible. We were just the tip of the spear, he says. He means it. Neil understands that they were able to walk on the moon only because an army of brilliant people solved millions of problems, small and large. Every circuit, every line of code, every calculation mattered. It was the largest project in human history, and it worked. September to November 1969. Neil, Buzz, and Mike are sent on a world goodwill tour. They visit 25 countries in 38 days. They meet kings, prime ministers, presidents, and popes. At each place, huge crowds greet them. In Bombay, India, hundreds of thousands of people fill the streets. In Paris, they are celebrated as the Lindberghs of a new age. In Tokyo, the excitement is almost religious. It's overwhelming, especially for Neil, who never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to fly. But he understands he has a responsibility. He represents something bigger than himself, the spirit of human exploration. 1971. Neil retires from NASA. He has fulfilled his mission. Other astronauts will go on to the moon on subsequent Apollo missions, but Neil has decided that his place is no longer in space. He accepts a position as a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati. He teaches the next generation of engineers. He avoids most interview requests, public appearances, and business opportunities. While Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins write autobiographies and give lectures, Neil gradually withdraws from public view. It's not that he's bitter or antisocial. He simply values his privacy. He wants to be remembered for his accomplishments, not his fame. Over the years, Neil Armstrong becomes an almost mythical figure, the first human to walk on the moon. But those who know him well see the real man, quiet, modest, brilliant, with a dry sense of humor. He loves flying private planes. He enjoys the farm he bought in Ohio. He reads voraciously about history and science. He occasionally serves on aerospace accident investigation committees, lending his expertise when needed. But mostly he lives a quiet, deliberately ordinary life. It's a conscious choice. Neil doesn't want his identity to be defined only by that small step decades ago. August 25th, 2012. Neil Armstrong dies at age 82, a few weeks after heart surgery. His family issues a statement that perfectly captures his spirit. For those who ask what they can do to honor Neil, we have a simple request. Honor his example of service, achievement, and modesty. And the next time you walk on a clear night and see the moon smiling down at you, think of Neil Armstrong and wink. The world mourns the loss of the first human to walk on the moon. But his legacy is much more than that famous step. Neil Armstrong proved that with enough determination, intelligence, and courage, humans can achieve the impossible. He showed that true heroes are quiet, modest, focus on the task more than glory. And he proved that touching another world is not the end of a journey, but the beginning. Today, Neil Armstrong's footprints remain in the lunar sea of tranquility, undisturbed by wind or rain, because there is no atmosphere to erase them. They will remain there for millions of years, a silent reminder that once, a boy from a small town in Ohio looked up at the sky and dared to dream of flying. And that dream took him farther than any human had gone before. Since then, only 12 humans have walked on the moon. The last one did so in December 1972. But new generations are looking up again, dreaming of returning, of going further, of reaching Mars and beyond. They are standing on the shoulders of giants. And the first among those giants was a quiet, modest, and extraordinary man named Neil Armstrong. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, and a legacy that will never be forgotten.